What is religious trauma? Let's talk about that. Religious trauma is suffering that comes from heavy involvement in fundamentalist, evangelical, or other conservative Christian movements. There was a time when psychologists drew a positive correlation between religion and mental health. And that's probably still the case for some people. However, for those involved in high control, fundamentalist, and evangelical churches, religious trauma is not uncommon. It's driving today's faith deconstruction movement. It can lead to people having religious trauma syndrome, which is similar to PTSD. I know this from personal experience because years ago, I was diagnosed with clinical depression after I came back from the mission field, having suffered from a spiritually abusive experience. My first therapist told me I had the symptoms of PTSD. Psychologist Marlene Winell coined the term religious trauma syndrome, which is defined as the condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritative, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination and spiritual abuse. Here are some examples of how it works through indoctrination and abusive practices. Religious trauma can come from these scenarios. Church leaders claim the Bible is inerrant, and they use it to intentionally or unintentionally instill fear, guilt, and shame in a person in order to control them. They might use the threat of God's wrath, judgment, or hell to manipulate, control, and reinforce how to live a life within the church's rules. This can mean manipulating someone to tithe to the church, to overserve as a volunteer, to follow the church's legalistic code of conduct, to pressure people to evangelize or become missionaries. Religious trauma happens when people are devalued by convincing them that they are inherently deceitful and wicked, and they can't trust their own internal logic. It happens when people's questions are downplayed or doubts, and they're downplayed by giving them pat answers. And those people are called backslidden or heretics when they can't accept those answers. It happens when women are disrespected by the teaching of submission to husbands and men leaders and disallowing women in leadership. It happens when people use the Bible to teach anti-LGBTQ teachings that demonize practicing gays, lesbians, and trans individuals, or instills hyper-purity culture on youth. It happens when people use corporal punishment and spanking of children as a way of discipline. It can happen when you create an environment where sexual abuse is tolerated, local authorities are not informed, forgiveness is premature, and victims are not protected. It happens if a church keeps abuse a secret to almost everyone in order to handle things biblically. The doctrines identified that cause these actions include the doctrine of the inerrancy of the Bible, the original sin and depravity doctrines, substitutionary atonement, belief in a two-faced retributive God, the doctrine of hell, anti-LGBTQ teaching, purity culture beliefs, church authority, and more. All of this can impact people in various ways, including people having difficulty with decision-making and critical thinking, struggling with existential angst, struggling or suffering from anxiety, depression, PTSD, problems with self-trust, difficulties integrating into society outside church, sleep disturbances, fatigue, chronic pain, headaches, etc. Now, the solution to religious trauma for people who are struggling with it is to come to terms with their high control religious experience and deconstruct the harmful doctrines, to learn alternative historical beliefs that debunk some of the harmful doctrines, to understand the psychology of church hurt, to reconstruct a love-centered faith or philosophy, and find a new community. A community where they can practice healthy spiritual practices, whether it's still within Christianity or not. Stay tuned to learn more about the solutions to religious trauma. If you like these videos, please subscribe and click the notifications icon.